Welcome to The Explainer. All right, today we're tackling one of history's biggest plot twists. How the United States went from a nation that wanted to avoid the world's problems to, well, the most dominant global power we've ever seen.
So here's the big question, right? How did a country founded on a warning to avoid foreign entanglements end up at the very center of pretty much everything? We're going to trace that exact journey, from its founding ideals all the way to its really complex modern reality.
To really get this, we've got to rewind, way back to the very beginning, to the single idea that pretty much defined America's relationship with the rest of the world for its first century. You see this quote, this one right here from George Washington's farewell address. This was everything. His warning to steer clear of permanent alliances wasn't just some friendly advice. It was the guiding principle. It became the bedrock of U.S. foreign policy for over 100 years.
So, what did that actually mean in the real world? Well, it pretty much boiled down to three things. Stay neutral in all of Europe's constant wars, trade with everybody, and laser focus on expanding across North America. The goal was super clear: build the country from the inside out, and don't get dragged into other people's fights.
Okay, so you've got this policy of mind your own business. But as you can probably guess, it couldn't last. Not forever. The 20th century comes along and a series of global crises don't just knock on America's door, they basically kick it down. And that forces this huge, dramatic pivot to superpower status.
And here's the thing you have to understand. This wasn't some grand plan. It was totally reactive. World War I was kind of the first poke. America dips its toes in the water, but then jumps right back out into isolationism. But World War II, that was the big one, the point of no return. The U.S. becomes the arsenal of democracy, and by the end, it's the undisputed economic and military giant. Then comes the Cold War, a 45-year standoff that locks in America's leadership role. And when the Soviet Union collapses, the U.S. is left as the last one standing, the world's sole superpower, a position its founders would have never, ever imagined.
Okay, so you become a superpower. Now what? How do you actually do that? Well, you need a toolkit, and that brings us to our third section, the tools of global power. First up, you've got diplomacy, and the main folks wielding that tool, the Department of State. Think of them as the nation's chief negotiators, the people whose job it is to build relationships and solve problems with words and agreements, hopefully long before things get messy. All right, so if diplomacy is soft power, then this is the hard power. We're talking about the Department of Defense. It manages the entire U.S. military, with the goal of deterring attacks and, when diplomacy isn't enough, protecting American interests around the globe. And then there's the stuff that happens in the shadows, the intelligence community. This isn't just one group, it's a whole network of 17 different agencies, including the one everyone's heard of, the CIA. Their job is to be the country's eyes and ears, but they also have a more controversial role, conducting covert actions to influence events without leaving any obvious American fingerprints. So you use these tools to make a deal with another country, a treaty. But how does that become actual binding law? It's not as simple as the president just signing a piece of paper. Nope, it's a whole constitutional process. The president's team negotiates it, but then it has to go to the Senate, and a full 2/3 have to say yes. It's a really important check on power. Okay, so we've seen the toolkit: diplomacy, military, intelligence. Now let's look at how these tools get put to use in the real world. That brings us to Section 4, Allies, Aid, and Intervention.
So remember that big warning from George Washington, steer clear of permanent alliances? Well, fast forward to today, and yeah, the entire U.S. foreign policy is built on a massive network of them. You've got the huge NATO alliance, bilateral treaties with countries like Japan and South Korea. I mean, this is a complete 180 from that founding principle.
Then there's military aid. And let's be clear, this isn't just about being generous. It's a strategic tool, a massive investment, really. As you can see from this data from 2020, billions of dollars are sent to key partners to help them strengthen their own security, which in turn helps achieve broader U.S. goals. And beyond just money and equipment, you have boots on the ground, a direct military presence. And when you look at the numbers, the scale is just mind-blowing. Check this out. Roughly 173,000 U.S. troops stationed in 159 countries as of 2021. That global footprint is what allows the U.S. to respond to crises almost anywhere on the planet. Now, when you have that kind of global footprint, you're not going to fly under the radar. It's just not possible. And that level of involvement, well, it inevitably leads to a lot of scrutiny and a lot of criticism. Which brings us to our final section.
And this is really where the debate gets heated. You've got this huge gap between the stated goals, exporting democracy, protecting human rights, and the common criticisms. For example, critics point to times the U.S. supported authoritarian governments for strategic reasons or got involved in regime change. This gap between the ideals and the actions is what fuels a lot of the international blowback.
And you can see this division clear as day in global polling. I mean, look at this poll from 2013. It found that nearly a quarter of the people asked, across 65 countries, saw the U.S. as the biggest threat to world peace. Wow. That really shows you how polarizing this superpower role can be.
So where does that leave us? Well, the thing is, this story is still being written. This whole journey, from a quiet, isolated republic to a global superpower, it's all led up to this one massive question for our time. As the world changes and other powers rise, what should America's role actually be? The answer to that is going to shape the entire 21st century.